Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of the forum. Apologies for jumping in a bit late. I have a shitty computer with shitty internet in a little tiny town in Washington where internet is hard to come by. Today, I've got Todd. Todd is in charge of doing weird, outside-the-box, immersive things at Google. That's probably not your official job title, but that's how I've categorized you in my brain. So Todd, why don't you jump in and give us your real title and tell us a little bit more precisely about what you do at Google.
Thanks, Renee. And actually, I think that your title is probably more fitting than my actual one, but I appreciate the chance to get to chat and talk with everyone. It's really a treat. And I am the founder and head of a team at Google called Immersive Arts. And we are an embedded team of artists and visual designers working alongside the AR and VR teams here. And we essentially are building early experiences and pilots of different experiences along the spectrum, AR, VR, and everywhere in between, with the dual purpose of launching cool stuff into the world, trying things, experimenting, learning, and starting to codify some patterns and insights and best practices in terms of what works and what doesn't in the space.
So can you give us an example of some of the work that you've done that maybe people would be familiar with, or maybe not?
Yeah. So we've last year, over the course of last year, did a project that's called Playground that some of you might be familiar with. It's essentially using the camera surface, in this case on the Pixel camera, as the opportunity to create and introduce characters and interactive elements into your space, characters that are fun and expressive and contextually aware. And so you can take those characters and drop them in to your space and have them react to objects in the space, to you, and you can then kind of use those as ways to means of communicating and expressing yourself with your friends. And our team was in charge of defining what those elements and characters were. There are a bunch of sets of them. In some cases, we designed them from scratch in terms of the look and feel and purpose of them. In other cases, we partnered with IP holders. So we worked with Disney and Netflix and Donald Glover, who created a set of characters, Childish Gambino characters, and we learned, and we've been learning a lot. And again, it's like we're both doing it to make these things and to help facilitate understanding and a pipeline for lots of people to use them down the road.
And is that understanding something that you are mostly focused on disseminating inside of Google, or is that something that you have a mandate to disseminate broadly, the general public?
Both. Yeah, I mean, I think, there's sort of concentric circles in terms of how we share and what we share. And so one of our immediate things is getting other teams at Google to be able to work on and create similar types of experiences. And then the concentric circles as they move out are other close partners who work alongside us a lot and are kind of our early partners. And then the ultimate goal is really to have something that is super useful and easy to kind of build upon for lots of people out there. And so I would say we're still fairly early days in some of that. But the neat thing is, because the industry is still kind of opening up all of these new possibilities, as we solve particular things, new challenges continue to emerge. So we're sort of continually at the razor's edge of the new thing and working with groups that are engineering new solutions to things here and kind of outside of Google.
So all of this is super fascinating, and I want to dive into it in more detail. But now that people have some context for who you are and what you're up to, I always like to like take a moment and talk about how you got into doing this, and because you've been like doing this for a while. I mean, we first hung out, I feel like 3 or 4 years ago at Sundance. So what was that moment where you decided you were going to get into immersive, media, and what were you doing before, and what was that transition like for you?
Yeah, yeah. I've been at this now for about 4.5 years in different variations. And before that, I spent about 12 years at Pixar, and I spent my passion and experience prior to this really is around animation, storytelling, and really that trying to solve that really complex bridge between technical creativity and storytelling, artistic creativity. And I loved working at Pixar. It was, in a lot of ways, hard place. It's a hard place to leave because it has this collection of people who are exceptional at what they do, and quite varied in their skill sets, and all kind of, when it's working well, all focused on a single creative goal, and all contributing in really unique ways. And so I really loved being there. I did a lot of different things there, including managing art teams, technical teams. I did a multi-year investigation there that was really interesting around the production pipeline and how that had evolved since the early days of Pixar and CG full-length feature films, and basically saying like, hey, like Pixar started this in several, many 15, 20 years ago plus. And since then, there's been a lot of changes in how we make films. And so trying to like ask some hard questions around how do we organize our teams? How do the various creative teams work together? How, when you have, 200-300 people all working on a common thing together, how do you drive to a common goal without people feeling just like cogs in the wheel? And we came up with some really interesting insights there. So I really loved it. But then at 10 plus years, I felt like, wow, this is something that if I don't try something different, I'm just going to kick myself later down the road. And more to the point, when I joined Pixar, it was already kind of the massive kind of cultural and business influence that it had been. And I really wanted to kind of get in on something earlier on that also had potential to really fundamentally change the way that we interact with technology, and then we use technology for to really understand ourselves better and become more really more human. And so I looked around a lot, and the immersive technology landscape had been heating up right around that time. I talked to lots of people, and I found a group here at Google that at the time was still doing the early cardboard experiments, and I really felt a surprising connection, actually. I wasn't expecting to want to come to a big tech company like Google, but I felt that there was a real passion and understanding for the complementary nature of technology development and artistic expression and the power of design here. And that I thought that if I came here, I could really help facilitate that in a meaningful way, and took the plunge. And it's been a wild ride ever since.
That's awesome. And was there an experience that you saw that was sort of that aha moment where you were like, okay, this is the thing?
I would say some of the early spotlight stories that Jan Pinkava and others had done. I knew Jan when he was at Pixar, and when I saw some of the stuff that they were doing, and it was just really scratching the surface. And it wasn't AR VR per se, but it was this magic window onto things that really opened up lots of possibilities, and honestly opened up lots of questions in my mind as to like, can the openness of this medium really facilitate meaningful storytelling in the same way? And if not, like, what's that going to look like? So I would say those were some of the things that like really piqued my interest.
What's Jan working on now? Because the Spotlight studio has disbanded, right?
Yeah, Spotlight disbanded last spring, and Jan and some of the other folks from Spotlight are I believe working on something together that they haven't rolled out yet, but it sounds pretty cool and interesting. And there's still some folks from Spotlight at Google, but others have kind of gone different directions. It's kind of a meaningless answer, but like I think that there's some stuff coming up that seems pretty cool.
I like stuff coming up. That gets me excited.
Yeah, totally.
And like another, like, I mean, so yeah, you mentioned a lot of things that I want to touch on. One is this idea of tech allowing you to be more human, which I think is a fascinating concept, and something I think about a lot, because I think we're not very human right now. I think tech has made us like super not human, but and not a particularly good way. But the other thing that I thought was really fascinating is just knowing how many people have come out of Pixar that have gotten into the immersive space. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, but I mean, you had the Oculus Story Studio crew that came out of Pixar. You came out of Pixar. We had a lot of people that went to, I guess, like Baobab, and like all these, the Pixar alum that have gotten into the immersive space is pretty dispersed and pretty strong. And yet Pixar doesn't seem to be doing much in the immersive area. And I'm curious, like, just to hear your thoughts on sort of that big company versus small company, and do you have to leave sometimes to start something new at a big institution? Like, what are your thoughts on the Pixar diaspora towards immersive?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on it, but I'll try to be succinct. I mean, I think that first, Pixar, not surprisingly, has an incredibly deep bench of talent across lots of vectors, and its business model, more or less, is to make 1 to 2 big feature films every year. So the cadence of that production process is relatively slow. And on top of that, people who've been there a long time don't leave because it's a great place to be. And so I would just say the first point is like lots of incredibly talented people who aren't. It's hard to find kind of your full expression of like what you can do in that scenario. And so I think that just sets the context for people potentially leaving in general. And then I also think, there is a spirit. Pixar by no means has become fully a dinosaur, I don't think, but I do think that there's this really interesting transition as Pixar has become kind of the gold standard over the years of what it does. It's easy to not take the same kind of chances that others need to take, and there's been kind of moments throughout Pixar's history where it's tried to do that. I think right now there's actually an interesting moment there in terms of just all the Disney Plus, and there's this like voracious appetite for the type of content, and so I think that opens up new possibilities at Pixar. But like there's just this like supply and demand of like incredibly creative, smart talent that want to try new things, and when that equation doesn't fully work, there's really an opportunity for lots of people to try different things. And then you couple that with the kind of opportunity to really try these things with like lots of resources and thought and energy going into the immersive space, and the technology kind of dovetailing in a way that it hasn't until relatively recently to try to achieve these types of things. And it's just a recipe for lots of people moving in and trying different things.
Yeah. I wonder if there's still so many people peeling off. There's this big wave of everyone who's like, oh, VR is going to be the thing. Let's leave our jobs and start a startup or whatever, right? And like, I definitely think that's not. I think people are like, oh, maybe I should stick around at my job for a bit. So I'm doing this all out of order. But so what do you feel like on that thread? Where do you feel like we are right now? That energy that got you so excited to, leave Pixar and start this new division at Google. Like, what's your temperature check? Because I've been sort of vacillating, but recently, I'd say like over the last like month, I've started to get really optimistic again. But I know we've been through quite a rough year or two. So what's your take on the recent past and where we are now, and sort of where we're headed in the next 12 months, let's say?
Yeah. I mean, I would say even just stepping back to the point where it was so frothy, that's not a great place to be. It very likely, if not very likely is going to lead to disappointment, particularly with like the long lead times in terms of just the technologies converging in a way that is transformative, and the cultural and kind of human side of people using technologies in different ways that happens. That's not something that happens in easy way, and so I guess it was already kind of set up for letdown. And on top of that, some of the more optimistic predictions obviously haven't really come to pass. And so I would say I'm also very optimistic. I'm optimistic in probably differently than when I showed up here. I would say I'm still personally like super passionate about the notion of using these technologies for storytelling. And I see some great opportunities there, but I've sort of dialed back my immediate kind of passion for that, or excitement around that, because I think that there's still lots being solved. And what I've been able to focus on, and our team has been able to focus on, I really am quite intrigued by, is more on the AR side, and on the really the kind of finding ways to bring more richness to the world that we are in. And I mean, it's kind of like just a very fundamental kind of notion here, but it gets back to the first point you brought up again of us being more human. And the notion, I really do believe that like some of these experiences that we're able to have of bringing further context into our own world can connect us more and not isolate us, and really are able to bring us to become more human. You know, it's funny. It's like we talk here, like places like Google, you know, it's sort of like using technology to make one super human, or right, like to give you powers that give you superhuman powers. And I think there's something that doesn't entirely resonate with me, because I really want us to focus on being human and being more human. And I think that the elements that I'm seeing come together for AR are really there, and it's not going to happen immediately. I think that there's the form factor of the phone is itself fairly limiting, but a lot of the work that's being done around that on the phone, I see that moving into wearables and others and other spaces that are really rich with possibility of connecting us in a meaningful way. So that's my temperature.
So yeah, a couple of things to unpack there. One is do you think fundamentally AR is going to be a better means of bringing people into, tighter bonds with each other? And, do you think it's going to do you think there's something about VR that is inherently like antisocial, or, removes us too much from our environment? Is that part of what you were getting at there?
Yeah, I don't know if it's fully inherent. I think that for VR to overcome that requires a level of it requires technological solutions that are really challenging, right? Like you have to like somehow be able to come up with replace the very natural organic way that we connect in the world and we connect to our surroundings. And with AR, you have that as for free. And I think because of that, there's just a lot more immediate opportunity for it to enhance our experiences of being present in the world that where we are at the time. That I'm not saying that VR can't do that. I just don't see it happening as elegantly or immediately by any stretch. And in the meantime, there's lots of opportunity to do it on the AR side of that spectrum.
And you mentioned the form factor of the phone being a little off, because that's like, yeah, I mean, for me, it's everything that I see in AR are sort of like training wheels. I think there's some killer applications that work really well with the phone, but for me, it all feels like a preamble to, some HMD based stuff.
Yeah.
So like, do you have any insight into timelines around when you think we're going to start seeing some real, glasses that you can wear out in the world? Magic Leap is fantastic. HoloLens is fantastic, but they're not something you're going to walk around with. They're not something that, they're more focused industrial use cases or, installation based art exhibits, whatever. They're fine for that, but I'm not going to wear it to the coffee shop.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we're starting to see indications of it. I think it's still like years, not months, obviously, but I do think that there's, in a smaller number of years, we're starting to see things that are, I think, going to have real possibility for use out in the world, and it may be. My sense is that it's not going to be generalized use case out the gate the way that something like Google Glass tried to be, but something more attuned to specific people, communities, needs that then can really accelerate into a more generalized space. And I don't know exactly the form of what that looks like, but I definitely see in both what's happening at Google and what I see out beyond some really compelling movement there. And there's vast improvements on the technology, but it's a really hard problem to solve. There's also, just how do we overcome that? How do we overcome it culturally and not kind of fall back into what's happened when this has been tried in the past in a way that's really honest and genuine in how we connect with each other and not just sort of a ploy.
Yeah. Do you feel like Google has some scar tissue from Google Glass? Is there like sort of institutionalized reticence around it, or was that like a thing you learned from it, but institutionally still very committed to, some form of glass-like thing that works better?
I think both. I mean, I think that there can't not be scar tissue in terms of just how that happened, but there's also, it affords a lot of opportunity to learn from it. And I also, the other reality is like, it also potentially puts Google in a different position of introducing it than other companies, right? In terms of to the extent that people there's still that glass association. So I think there's a lot of really, really salient lessons that Google and the industry can learn from in terms of how that rollout happened and also the timing of it. I mean, if you think about it, there's still incredibly difficult technological challenges, and that was several years ago.
Yeah, I mean, that came out in what, 2012, 2013? When it was, I mean, it feels like ancient right now.
It seems ancient, yeah, which is pretty mind blowing at the, yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't fully know. I also, I personally care deeply that this is not something that is another thing that takes us away from each other. And so I am very committed to doing everything I can from the vantage I have to making sure that we are transparent and honest with how this actually introduces new forms of us connecting with each other, and when it doesn't, to really expose that and highlight it.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like, yeah, undoubtedly there's going to be this really dark side to this new tech. I mean, it seems inevitable that for certain classes of users, for certain use cases, people are going to be really, really pulled out of their environment, and it's just going to be this dystopic thing. But I feel like the other side will also be true, and I think the bad shit's going to happen. There's no way we can avoid it, but we can create alternatives, right? We can show how the tech can be used to enrich ourselves and, you know, make our lives more, you know, connected and less dystopically disconnected. I don't know. I sometimes I feel like we're building this weird cage for ourselves, and no matter what we do, like all of our energy is just going to get like harnessed and used to build this thing. I kind of feel like we're like the loading, like the boot up program for some other program that, you know, we have no idea what it's actually doing. Do you ever feel that way? Like I kind of feel like there's this inevitable thing that we're not in control of, that something else is wanting us to build, and we're just sort of these little tiny lines of code that are writing this bigger program. I
wouldn't. I haven't put it exactly in those terms, but your trepidation I share in some ways, for sure.
So like, let's make this more concrete, because I think it's super important. And I think, I mean, if you think about what we're doing, it's like we're creating these worlds, right? And right now that seems very light and non-consequential. But when people start spending all of their time in these worlds that we build, all of a sudden these things actually matter a whole lot. So specifically, how do you build a world that allows people to be more human? Whether it's in AR or VR, like what are some tangible guidelines that you've started to stumble upon that you could give to artists that are listening to this and creators who are listening to this? Well, yeah, and then Marta has a good thing. Yeah, like following up on that. Are there any examples for? Yeah.
Yeah. I think what I go back to is honestly a lot of what I saw when things worked at a place like Pixar, and when that it's different, right? I mean, the thing about AR is like there's the absence of a blank canvas, and so you're working in the noisiness of the world, which is like kind of the opposite of what you do for a feature film. But the fundamentals of like really understanding the core, the backstory and like the core of what you're creating are the same. And so I worked, you know, I spent several years working on Inside Out and really trying to understand the characters of Inside Out, and the amount of time and investment that goes into defining all of the hard work that goes into like defining what those characters are that isn't itself ever seen in the final version is critical to to achieving kind of what you're describing, right? And it's like it has to be come from a real experience and a heart of things that the creators have felt and suffered. And in that case, right, it's like a story of really a story of loss of a parent feeling kind of the loss of their child as they kind of move into a different connection with them. And like all of that deep thinking needs to be infused in the or I think it's it does ring hollow. So you think of like some of the work now that's being done with the various assistants, and how do you, like, it's a question, right, of like, do you create a personality for these assistants in a way that is human and meaningful? I mean, what does that look like? And I think that we need to do a lot more deep thinking around what those characters, what the personalities of those things are, and whether they're what makes them like humans and what makes them different than humans, and really invest deep amount of time in defining that before we build it. Because otherwise these things are at best they're frivolous, where they're 20 second endorphin hits and then that's it. But at worst they're just like not well thought out in any way, and they're insincere in terms of like how they're allowing us to relate to ourselves in the world.
So you're sort of tapping into like virtual beings, virtual characters, which I guess makes sense, because I think a lot of the interactive, narrative or experiential stuff, is going to involve some form of, either super basic AI driven or eventually pretty complex. So, so what you're saying, just to digest it, is that the advice that you would give to someone who's creating, AR or VR experience is to think deeply around what those characters are and how the user would relate to them, to, make sure that that's a relationship that's healthy.
Yeah, and to really test it out and to try it. It's like, as you're reflecting it back to me, and these are all really good questions too. Thanks others for adding them. It can sound so trite to think about it this way, but there's something really it's I think really a profound thing to really dedicate effort around this. And I look to, we're designing these things for everyone, but I look to designing characters for kids, and I look at characters from some of the films I've worked on, how that relationship with kids gets extended. If you think through, like, once they, the kid with, holding the toy, and like their relationship, how that evolves over time, and how meaningful that can be to the child. And I watch my own kids doing that, and that to me seems like a course that is really ripe with possibility. And the other thing that's so interesting about that is that there's things that are predefined about those characters, and there's things that are just like open to interpretation for the person interacting with them, and they fill all that in. And like getting that balance right, I think, is really, really important. And trying to find groups that are the first users, so who are open-minded about building up those relationships. And so we're doing some experimentation where we're kind of thinking about how you design these types of things for different communities, for different ages, for how kids might think about it versus people who may not have the immediate openness to building up these relationships over time.
I'm sorry, I muted myself for a second there. We got some questions coming in. You wanna tackle some of these in the little question tab? We got one from Joshua. Google operates at a large scale. It's a real big company. So perhaps your perspective is a little different than others. Have you come across any colleagues or research looking into healthcare applications or implications on AR? Seems like a headset could lead to reduced elbow and neck pain for millions. to $1 trillion or more in savings and healthcare costs. So basically, like people working at a computer versus working in AR. Like, yeah, because my body hurts all the time from being at a computer. Like I've got like chest pain from my, my hands like physically hurt. Yeah, you come across any of that?
Yeah, there's a lot being looked at there, both like opportunities and also being sure that we're not inadvertently introducing new challenges, right? We actually have a bunch of collaborative. It is a huge company, and there are definitely times where we'll be working on something and 80% there, and then we'll realize there's another part of the company working on something very similar, which is kind of mind-boggling, but that's the way this place is set up. But what we have engaged a lot in those early explorations with different groups looking at the ergonomics, so like what you're pointing out, Joshua, of these wearables, as well as like other health benefits, also accessibility benefits, right? So you can think of these things like both for people who aren't necessarily able to navigate the world as readily without them, and looking at those examples as kind of starting points for like benefiting lots and lots of people. So people who say are, you could imagine a wearable, right, with either audible or visual, with someone who is has low sight to kind of navigate the world in a way they couldn't otherwise. We actually shared this, and we're working with a team that is using early versions of Google Lens to allow people who aren't able to navigate street signs and understand or not able to read as in a way that it lets them get around a place, to navigate a city in a way that like they otherwise couldn't. And so these are like real, they're on an individual level, like really transformative things to how someone lives their daily life. And we're trying to identify those things in a way that like are like hugely impactful for that group of people, because then it actually translates into lots and lots more people, even if the broader group of people don't identify in the same way with those needs.
Cool. Glad to hear that. And you sort of tapped on a little bit of this in terms of Google being a, many faceted, tentacled organization. But Alina has a question around getting the perspective that Google is backed away from certainly like the VR side of things. Do you think that perception is correct? And do you think Google will ever come back to VR?
Yeah, I think it's not an abandonment, but more just sort of a pause and realignment in terms of kind of where things are. I think that the reality is that the kind of general platforms that some of the early Daydream was exploring, we're not finding the traction that we necessarily anticipated. And at the same time, I think some of the AR applications we realized have a much more immediate opportunity to have real impact for lots of people, in part because there's just the immediate extension of people already having their phones. And so part of our kind of immediate shift is kind of like recognizing that reality. But ultimately, there's still an enormous amount of work going on across the entire AR VR spectrum here. And I very much believe that those things, for this to ultimately succeed, those things converge, and Google's going to continue to be committed across the board there.
Cool. That's good to hear. it makes me sad whenever anybody takes a step back, and it can be scary for people that are in the industry when a big player like Google, there's a perception of it stepping back or pausing, which it has in some ways, like you said. But I'm glad that your read on it is that there's still broad institutional support and interest and commitment.
Yeah.
But let's hope they double down and make some new bets soon, because we need the Google money. We need it. Turn this. Todd, where's the spigot, Todd? Find it. Turn the cash spigot on. Okay, so we got another comment from Kim. I love that people are asking questions, so I want to get to them all. Yeah, not so much a question, but a comment. It's been looking at environmental psychology and learning from good architectural design for creating virtual spaces for VR. Are there comparable lessons to be learned for AR? Meaning, how do you design for a comfortable AR experience? I guess with spatial architectural thoughts wrapped into that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that part of what we're designing for right now for the immediate things that we're launching, because they're smartphone based, have their own implications. Maybe this is blindingly obvious, but people can't hold up phones for too long. Hurts your arm. It a few things, right? Hurts your arm. It takes you out of the context, so you walk into people or cars or trees, and so part of the kind of just like cadence of the flow that we found is really useful is the kind of like bite size, like getting information, contextualizing it, putting your phone down, and then moving into the next spot, as opposed to kind of just having this always on experience. That obviously there are affordances that might change there once you have glasses or other things, but that's kind of the more immediate thing that we're learning. And it's still, even with glasses, there's still the kind of like, where's the balance of like focusing on the place that you are versus the additional information or contextual information that's being allowed. And so that doesn't go away with glasses. A couple examples of that, we designed, I don't know, some of you might have been there at Google I/O this year. We designed the ability on the I/O app to navigate around I/O, and we've actually done this, and we're looking at doing this kind of in different places as well. And it's really just like an orientation of knowing, oh, this building is that direction, or this building is that direction, and it's about this far away. So it doesn't give you step-by-step directions in the same way as other things.
Google Maps just, when I was in Venice Film Festival last week, for the first time I saw it had this AR component, which sounds very similar. I held the phone. It was great in Venice because that place is a fucking maze. You get like lost in 2 seconds.
Totally.
And I used it all the time. It was really, really handy.
Totally, yeah.
But to your point, like, it was weird. Like, I'd hold it up and I'd walk for like half a block and be like, oh, this feels so strange just holding my phone up. And like, because you sort of have to like keep your eye on it and you're not looking at where you are, and all those reasons you pointed out.
Yeah. And we've been working with that team too, and in actually designing that and what that looks like. And it's also just like the social kind of like curiosity around someone holding up their phone and like, are you filming me, or what? There's a lot going on there that is like right now suboptimal.
It feels a little awkward. I feel self-conscious holding my phone up in that way, but you never know which parts of those are going to like disappear in terms of being awkward, right? Like, there's so much phone etiquette that used to feel really weird, and now you don't think twice about it.
Well, similar, like we designed with that. Last year we showed this at I/O last year, the Fox that called Navimals Fox, that like allowed you follow it from point A to point B as your spirit animal. And we have been kind of working on designing lots of different animals around that front. And it's really interesting just testing that out too, because but first of all, there's like the fundamental question of like, why you have an animal versus an arrow or a directional cue, right? Is it just for fun? Does it give you more information? Does it just connect you emotionally in a different way? So there's that. And then on top of that, it's like, how does it change your behavior. And it is really striking how much trust people immediately put into an animated fox, such that they will like walk step by step in a way that wasn't necessarily intended, right? It's like you have the fox animated in a way that it walks like a fox. But I was surprised how much the kind of literal translation of that behavior into the way that other people followed it, and were sort of almost potentially too trusting of it, right? In terms of like,
yeah, well, that gets back to the virtual being thing that you were talking about, like how important it is that these characters aren't sociopaths, because when you have a relationship with somebody, you're going to mirror their behavior. You know, you're going to have some, you know, you're going to become like that person in some degree, which is why it's so important to have nice friends and surround yourself with people that, you know, have good values. But when those people start to be, you know, algorithms that Google dreams up, you know, and other companies.
Yeah.
So many like weird murky waters.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I don't know if you have done the Apple Art Walk. You know, Apple now has these commissioned these 6 artists to create AR work that they now do walking tours at, in 6 cities. It's definitely an interesting thing worth checking out, and there's some really beautiful stuff that came out of it. It's also, that to me is also a very striking thing to this point of like how you design for AR as you're navigating. It's clearly kind of early days for how these experiences work, but you know, you're navigating through a busy city, and in this case, you're kind of experiencing art on top of the existing environment and buildings and other things, and it can work really well, but it can also bump up against the chaos of reality in many surprising ways, and it's and so designing for the kind of give and take and flexibility of like how activity works in the real world is a really challenging thing that I think we just need to keep trying and experimenting with these things to learn from them, because that's the only way to kind of tackle it, I think.
So we're getting pretty close to the end of our hour together. I want to make sure that people have a chance to ask any other questions they have. So throw them in either the question-y section or just in the chat log, and we'll address them. But one question I had that I wanted to make sure we cover is how can creators, artists, studios engage in the work that you're doing? We have a lot of people in our community that are doing really innovative work. Is there some opportunities for them to engage with your team, or how do you think about collaborating or working with outside artists, creators?
Yeah, we have been working with a variety of creators on projects, but we'd love to find out if you have interesting ideas and that seem to resonate with some of the stuff I've been talking about. We would love to chat and see if there's an opportunity to collaborate. And you can always feel free to email me. My email is at shaiman@google.com, SHAIMAN @google.com, and happy to chat and follow up. We're in the throes of designing a more public face for the immersive arts team. So we haven't launched it yet, but there's soon gonna have a kind of a public presence of sharing some of the examples of the types of work that we're doing, so that people can see kind of what we've done that's worked and what we've done that's been a total screw up, and learn from that. And also, I think that's another avenue for connecting with us. So right now it's a little bit piecemeal makeshift. Feel free to reach out to me. It's soon. I think there'll be kind of more public face for those types of collaborations.
Because I'm on my phone. Would you mind throwing your email into the chat log, just so people have access to it easier and make sure they get it right? And then Joshua has another question. As part of social justice being a potential AR killer app, do you think it is weird that public spaces don't already have art to walk through. So like, yeah, I'll leave it at
that. That public spaces don't have art to walk through.
Yeah, Joshua, did you mean that there's just not like a larger public art presence in most cities? Is that what you're asking about? Because Joshua also mentioned something in the comments about the potential killer app of AR being something that can contrast, reality with, what maybe it ought to be. Project comes to mind that's on Kaleidoscope right now is about surfacing pollution. So taking something that's invisible but making it visible.
I think that those types of ways of visualizing what we're all around us all the time and we're not seeing are huge opportunities. And the public, I'm trying to connect like the dots between AR as the killer app for social justice and the non-availability of public art.
Well, the big advantage that we have with overlaying and creating public art through AR is, of course, the cost and zero marginal cost of replicating it in any other city, right? Like public art is expensive, and it also has to be something that the community agrees upon because it's something that we all have to look at. So there's public art is a challenge.
I see.
And it's also cities have lots of priorities and that's often not at the top of that list. But with AR, that seems like a lot of those challenges can be addressed easier. So maybe we'll see a flourishing of public art.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. Thanks for the follow-up, Joshua, too, on that. I think that it allows experimentation around that public art if done in the right way, where someone, if the means just don't exist for actually creating the physical art, or there's we're actually doing a lot around experimenting with the combination of when there is public art of using augmentation to really evolve it and change it over time and make it and really bring it in organic ways. So we're actually collaborating with different artists around that too. So that is a really interesting perspective.
Cool. And Jody, that's great that you're working on an AR project in this space. Can't wait to see it.
Oh yeah, me too.
So what? I guess to leave things, what can we do to support the work that you're doing? I mean, it's so important for us to have champions of AR and VR working at Google. So what can we do to help your division succeed from the outside? How can we agitate from outside of Google to help your efforts thrive?
I mean, the first and foremost is make great stuff. And it's like we're all trying to find the ways that what we're creating is fundamentally 10 times, 100 times different and better than what exists in the world right now. So continue to experiment and try things. Again, reach out to me if you have ideas around it. I've met some of you, but I look forward to meeting more of you in different, places where we all gather. And I think that I'm incredibly bullish about in the long term for this. And I know it's sometimes this is a pretty rocky road in terms of how we navigate these things. So I would just really encourage you to create stuff from your heart and stuff that's that you really deeply believe in and that is moving to you, because that's not just how it's going to help my team, but it's just going to help the entire industry to find its way.
Man, that is a beautiful sentiment that I completely echo. And I think that that's actually the ideal thing for folks to be focusing on in this, this rough moment or challenging moment in the industry where, we don't have that frothy, funny money flowing around. I think it's a great moment to to work on those projects that you're deeply passionate about, and not that you're trying to like reverse engineer what is going to be the most commercially successful, because nobody fucking knows what's going to be the most commercially successful. So I think looking inside, what excites us or what excites you, what resonates and sort of sets your soul on fire, like make that thing, because that thing is probably going to be the thing that will, you know, has the greatest chance of catching on and proving that this art form has merit and has worth.
Totally agree. Well said.
Well, I think that's a great place to stop. Todd, thank you so much for spending an hour hanging out with me. Sorry to be in this coffee shop. Here we are in beautiful, rainy downtown Washougal, which is this itty bitty city in the Columbia River Gorge. It's beautiful. The internet is terrible. This is an ongoing odyssey for people that have tuned into these. I'm always trying to figure out where the fuck can I get like fast internet to do these things. But anyways, thank you for your time, and I look forward to hanging out with you in the real world. When will we see you next? Will we see you at Oculus Connect?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, well, we'll see you there, buddy.
All right, thanks everyone. It was really fun hanging out. Thanks, Renee, for all the great questions.
Yeah, all right. Cheers, buddy.
Bye.
Bye.